The thing that I like most about being here tonight, I am going to do a reading from my book, Flight of Passage, which is about our 1966 trip to California and back when we were just little guys. But the thing that I love about tonight is the use of the franchise here at the Boothbay Railway Village. Yeah, it's an important tourist stop, and you see all the grandparents here on weekends with their grandchildren and so forth during the summer. But you always have to use a place like this for what it can produce culturally as well. So I'm very proud to be part of this series because this is what the old town hall should be. Second of all, Laurie Campbell from the Maine Coast Bookshop is here. I get complaints when I do this reading. I don't do it a whole lot anymore, but I'm glad to be doing a reading tonight because I have a new book coming out in the summer. And it's kind of warm-up time for me. But I get a lot of complaints from people because they want signed copies of the book. So Laurie was gracious enough to order Flights of Passage, copies of Flight of Passage, and I'll sign them for anybody who wants one tonight. And I regard the local bookstore, and if you think of the towns in Maine that you like, I regard the local bookstore as the anchor of Main Street. So it's not just supporting my book, it's supporting another great local institution, which is the Maine Coast Bookshop. Let me get started this way. I'll just talk a little bit and then I'll do some readings from my book. But memory is an expression of character. That's what we're doing when we're writing a book. You're expressing character. If I had to describe simply the events that took place when we flew to California and back that year, it would be maybe a 50-page book. But it's creating the context. And what this book was really about was brothers and fatherhood, and also the 60s and the culture of the 60s. So what happened to us, just to create the context for you, was we had a large family. We had 11 children, and there were 6 boys. And my mother used to say, and including your father, that's 7 boys. And so he would feel guilty. He would express this by saying things like, I'm the one that got her pregnant after all, you know. And so he would express his guilt about what it was like to raise 11 children by coming home on weekends. And we went through a horse phase, and then we went through kind of a yellow school bus phase where we rode around on that. And then we got into flying when we were old enough, because my dad had been a flight instructor during World War II and a barnstormer before that, and he would regale us at night before this Franklin stove we had in our house about all his great stories, you know. Field was short, boys, really short, you know. So on Saturday morning, he would round us all up, all the boys. We would get in this big old Chevy that he had and drive out to the local grass strip, which was called Basking Ridge. And it was a lot like, is Bodenham still a grass strip? Does anybody know? Yeah. It was a lot like Bodenham. You know, perfect airport. It was the only airport I ever saw that was better was at Granville, New York. Flying to Granville, New York, it's perfect. There's a graveyard on both ends of the runway. But Basking Ridge had obstructions on all, you know, telephone lines and everything, big chicken farm and stuff all over the place. So 2,700-foot strip, and you got to be a pretty good pilot flying out of there, especially as a youngster. So we would get there for the weekend, and all of the other pilots there felt sorry for my dad, and they would always offer to take one of the kids up and fly us around. A couple of my brothers are here, and they remember that. But airports were wonderful places in those days. They're kind of like marinas during the same period, or even today. Like the local Ford dealer, whose name is a wealthy guy and everything, but his name really was Jim Crow. He had a twin Navion that he flew out of that strip. And he would be there right beside the local plumbing and heating contractor. And there was a wonderful leveling experience, sort of a democratization when you got onto the airport, because nobody was who they were at that point. They were just another pilot, you know. And the strip was full of old, you know, VC-12D Taylorcrafts and Cubs, lots of Cubs, PT-23, PT-19, Morrow, Myers biplane, and so forth. So what would happen is we'd get to the airport and everyone was going to fly away to the air show or for a $100 hamburger. And one pilot or another said, all right, I'll take Brian, I'll take Nick, and I'll take Rinker. So this is how I learned to fly. It's how we all learned to fly. And what happened was, I got to be pretty good at all these planes and the personalities that came along with them. So Jack Gould was a favorite of mine. He was the local well driller, smoked a lot, and he had a gravelly voice, you know. He'd say, I'll take Rinker, you know. And he had a Tailcraft BC-12D, which was the first plane, I think, somebody might correct me, but it was a very early laminar flow wing design. They got away from that Hershey bar and got nice thin wing. It was very good for aerobatics. And my dad would say, yeah, take him up and give him some air work, you know. We'd go to an air show together. And Jack's whole thing was, I never go over 1,000 feet. If I go over 1,000 feet, I need oxygen. And nobody's going to put oxygen in a little tailcraft. So we'd get up there, and he'd go, well, your dad said I should teach you some turns. How about a snap roll, you know? And I'd go, all right, you know. I was like 9 years old, 10 years old, whatever. And he gets that thing over on its back. And if you remember the tailcraft, some of you might remember it had a header tank up front, a gas tank sort of right on the other side of the windshield, almost above your knees, like the Piper J3 Cub. And when you rolled that thing on its back, all the negative G's, and you're looking at it like this, and the gasoline is leaking out and coming up in the negative G's, up the windshield, through the rubber gasket on the windshield, across your face like this, and over towards Jack, and it gets over there, and it puts out, this the gasoline, puts out his cigarette. And Jack goes, I hate it when it does that. Here, let me get another cigarette later. Just, you know. And we're 800 feet inverted now, and he's trying to get this cigarette lit, you know, with the flame going. And he just shakes the yoke and stuff. He just, it's your airplane, son, you know. So I would have to fly the plane while he's trying to get the cigarette lit, inverted. And then there was a guy named Art Storm. Brian probably remembers Art Storm. Art was a Bell Labs engineer. A lot of Bell Labs guys there in northern New Jersey. And Art had 2 documents in his wallet who would identify who he was. The first was his FAA medical, which he was very proud of, even though there was no reason to be proud of an FAA medical in those days, because there were a lot of pilots who were doctors, and you could always get a medical, no problem. So he had an FAA medical. He also had a laminated card from the Social Security Administration, which entitled him to special benefits because he was legally blind. And that was America in those days. You're legally blind, but you got a medical that certified you as having perfect vision, you know. So he had an air group. So Art had an air group. And the reason he liked it, because of his sight difficulties, Art was a frustrated Walter Mitty type. He wanted to be a fighter pilot. So he got the air group because it had a canopy on it. You could push the canopy back. And as you came in, you could feel like you were in the Corsair or the P-51 or whatever, because he'd throw the canopy back and do the military approach, you know, really tight. You could look out the window and everything. So we were coming in one day, and he was doing that, and he had these glasses that he wore because of his issue. The glass was really thick, and they kind of like looked like the portholes on a Soviet spacecraft, you know. And we come, and he pulls it in the turn, he throws the canopy back. The slipstream coming in sideways in that turn blows his glasses off. And he's, whoa, you know, whoa, Rinker, can you see the instruments? I can see the instruments, Art. You know, can you see the runway? I go, I can see the runway. He just wiggles the yoke, which was our signal to each other. It's your airplane, son, you know. And then the third one that happened, the third story I just remember was So my dad was a steerman instructor during World War II, very exacting standards, and on the old sectionals, you know, they had a little red circle with a miner's tool on it. And that, Steve talked before about pilotage, but if your course line was across there, and he was teaching you cross-country flying, and you were supposed to be over that mine, you better be over that mine when you get there and be able to read it. So we got pretty good at navigation. So we were flying home from Lancaster one day. It was a winter day. It was bumpy and cold, and I was sick of flying. But I was looking forward to getting back in the pattern because I could take the plane off at that point in flight, but I could not land it. So I was looking forward to getting back in the pattern because I could turn the plane back to my father. And we get in the pattern, and he's coming around. And this Cub we had, it was a PA-11 Cub, and like standard Piper Cub, and there was a stick in the front and a stick in the back for the two pilots. And what you were supposed to do when you flew it solo was take the stick in the back, the instructor's stick out, because then it wouldn't snare in a seatbelt or anything. And all day, you know, we'd be taking the stick out, putting it back in, because everybody was flying the plane, two at once, one. Or my brother was solo, he would take the stick out. And there was a little bolt with a safety nut that went through the bottom of the stick in the back that held it in place, you know. But that we hadn't used that in about 30 years. I mean, there was just so many people in and out of that plane all day. And so you just get in the plane and pound the stick in. So we're coming around, and my father was a very graceful pilot, always did a nice smooth landing and everything. We're coming and approaching. All of a sudden, well, boom! We hit, and the plane bounces up. Whoa! We're just inches from the stall now. And I'm going, oh, geez, what's wrong with my father? He usually does such a graceful thing. And I could tell, you know, this was getting serious. And I look back at my father, and with one hand, he's got his thumb in the socket for the stick. And the other hand, he's got the stick in his hand. And I go, whoa, and he goes, it's your airplane, son, you know. So that's how we learned to fly. That's what it was like. By the, you know, before, I mean, you just got in and you flew, and and people go, well, how did they get to California? I mean, you know. By the time, you know, I mean, I knew emergency procedures that would qualify me for an air transport rating in 12 different aircraft before I had even reached puberty, you know. So we were good enough to do this. So what happened was, when you write a memoir, it's a lot more, memory is character, and it's an expression of character, and it's a lot more than just the story of the flight. It's a story of family, it's a story of the 60s, it's the universality of sibling conflict and all that kind of stuff. So I wrote a first draft of the book, and I sent it in to my editor in New York. Of course, I thought it was my final draft, you know. Sent it in to my editor, and he says, well, you know, there's just one big problem I have. And I said, well, what's that? He goes, well, I just think you kind of sugar-coated things. I have a feeling that there was more of a conflict between you and your brother than you're indicating in the book so far. You might want to review that with your brother or something. So I call my brother, and I go, and we're now in our 40s, you know. And I call my brother, and I go, well, Kern, you know, I got this editor down in New York, and he thinks maybe, you know, we had some conflict. He used this term I hadn't heard before called sibling rivalry. And my brother goes, well, Rick, that guy must be pretty smart, because when I was 17 years old, I hated your ass. So that dynamic, which is that my brother and I had to resolve the conflicts of our childhood in a very combative, brotherly competition in a big family, becomes sort of the subtext of the book that's very important. So I introduce it very early. This is from page 7, and this is you want to get this kind of material in the book early, because the reader has to be set up for what's going to happen and what's going to be resolved. And the big problem between Kern and I was we were very different brothers. He was the older brother and was kind of expected to lead. but he was very dutiful, very well-behaved, bashful and shy, and never caused anybody any trouble. And I would be doing things like getting arrested at the bus stop for, mooning old ladies and things like that. And I was in trouble all the time, but everybody liked me, So that was very frustrating for my brother. So I'll just read you this one thing from early in the book. Everyone did their best to encourage Kern. One day, coming in from school and infuriated by some stunt I had pulled off, he complained to my mother about me. My mother was petite and very pretty, quintessentially Irish, and so youthful no one could believe that she had delivered 11 children. Like a lot of mothers at the time, even the Protestant ones, she was a devotee of the Rose Kennedy School of child rearing. The small things, such as how you dressed and whether or not you were polite to priests, mattered, and children could be pushed toward greatness by modeling themselves on someone who was unquestionably successful. Well, Kern, my mother said, maybe you should try becoming more like Rinker. He likes people, he works hard, and he never gets cavities. My mother did a splendid job raising 11 children, but it was the wrong thing to say. Kern never got over it. A few years ago, when I was undergoing painful root canal work, Kern called nearly every night to ask after me and flooded me with get well cards. I've never seen him so solicitous about my welfare, and he was cheerful about it too, almost jubilant. Listen, Rink, don't let this thing get you down, he said to me as I lay moaning in bed, gingerly holding the phone up to my ear. Eventually, everybody gets tooth decay. So that is a subtle way. It's always the smaller details that allow you to set things up for the reader, and it's better to show them, not tell them and explain it the way I just did. No, give them an incident. So there was something else that happened. So we took the trip. A lot of you have read the book. We got to California back, and my father flew out commercial to see us when we were out there. But we took the trip, and all through the trip we had to read these articles about us in the newspaper where my father was vicariously living the trip through his interviews with newspaper reporters. And he would say things like, well, the boys were very moved by John F. Kennedy's inaugural speech. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And Kern and I would read this stuff in the newspapers, and we'd look at each other and go, I don't even remember Kennedy saying that. And then the other thing my father said was, we taught the boys to work out on airplanes every winter in our shop. It was a lot better for them than smoking marijuana and going to discotheques. And again, I kept, Kern, what's a discotheque? So he paraded this wholesome, and that's why the trip took off, and it was such a media frenzy at the time. We appeared so wholesome at a time when Americans were looking for images that made them feel wholesome again, because the country was coming apart in the 60s. And so my father promoted this idea that, we were the antidote to smoking pot. But we spent the last 5 winters recovering fabric airplanes. And you take grade A Irish linen and you spray it with butyrate dope. And you get high as hell. I didn't need marijuana. So what happened was, so there was a big event in our family, which was that my sister McNamara, Mackie we called her, came out. There was kind of in those days, there was a pretty big segregation in families between brothers and sisters. Brothers all went off and did something, and sisters did something else. They even lived on separate wings of the house. And we never, unisexual, wasn't a word. So Mackie came out and started helping us with the airplane, sanding and doping, and she found out, boy, there's something in the air out here. I feel really good, And the mechanic said, taught us how to mix the dope with a lot of thinner. The more thinner you use, of course, the better the high. Thinner carries quite a punch itself, and thin dope aspirates into the air in finer particles that go down more easily into the lungs. All of this was a revelation to Mackie. It had never occurred to her that while doping a plane, you get high on dope. Sanding was boring, back-breaking work. The dust curling up from the fabric coated our noses and throats, and our arms and shoulders ached after an hour. But fortified with butyrate, we could hardly tell we were working. Besides, the warm weather had arrived, and Mackie and I had ferocious cases of spring fever, and we just wanted to goof off out there and get high. As soon as we got into the shop every night, we were clamoring for Kern to start up the compressor and give us our first dose. "Hey, Kern," I called out, "give us a hit." Kern was a very earnest guy. "Oh, come on, Ring," Kern said. "This is an aircraft recovering project. You don't try to get high. It's supposed to just happen by mistake." "Screw that, Kern," I said. "Give us a hit or we don't sand." So it went on like that, and nimbus of butyrate dope just coming down on your face on a hot spring night. My mother didn't have any idea about what was going on out there. To her, a plane rebuild was just a plane rebuild. My father had always been deliberately vague about our weekend activities together, and he pawned off a lot of platitudes to my mother that she seemed to accept. For example, despite all evidence to the contrary, he told her that he was a very safe pilot and that he was teaching us to fly the same way. So he never told her about the airplane dope. Working on airplanes all winter, he told her, built character in boys. And Kern and I were getting along so much better that year that she figured this must be true. One night in early May, my mother looked out through the kitchen window and saw 3 of her 4 oldest children prone on the grass beside the barn. We were completely plastered on dope, but she couldn't tell that from a distance. Working that hard on a plane, building all that character must have been tiring, she thought. Maybe we needed something to eat. So she loaded up her wicker tray with cookies and milk and came out across the lawn, quiet as a cat. Suddenly she was there, and I was looking up at her pretty, pert face through the little holes in a wicker tray. "Oh, hi, Mom. Are you children all right?" "Oh, we're fine," Kern said, "just taking a rest from the plane." "Why are you all lying on the grass?" "Oh, it's a nice night out, I guess." "Well, maybe you should come in." "Mommy," Mackie said, "you know what?" "No, dear, what?" "Carl Kinshirf wears Davy Crockett underpants." Carl was a kid who lived in our town, and we went to grammar school with him. I'd never heard about his Davy Crockett underpants before, but it sounded like Carl. "Excuse me, Mackie?" my mother said. "What did you just say?" "I said Carl Kinshirf wears Davy Crockett underpants." "Mackie, don't say that again. I heard you the first time." "Mom, you said, what did you just said? And I just said, Carl Kinshirf wears Davy Crockett underpants." "Don't say that." "What?" "That. Carl Kinshirf wears Davy Crockett underpants? What's wrong with that? Don't say it." The night went on from there. And it was one of those times when I learned the discipline of the Catholic doctrine of silence. It's a lot better just not to talk about it. So I'm collapsing a lot of history here, but what happened was we took off, we flew through these thunderstorms in Pennsylvania, we got to Indiana the first night, we got into Arkansas the second day, following railroad lines and stuff like that. And we disappeared for a couple days. It took us 2 days to cross Texas. It's 800 miles across this lot in turbulence and headwinds in a little Piper Cub. And so even though we called home every night, the press had sort of lost sight of us. They didn't know where we were, but my dad kept telling them, well, they'll show up in El Paso. going to be in El Paso probably a certain day. And that was after we'd flown over the Rockies and everything. So we got to El Paso, and at that point there was tremendous media interest. And this was the scene. This is what happened there. As we taxied in at the General Aviation Airport at El Paso, an anxious knot of reporters and cameramen jostled near the pumps. All across Texas, the geezers and the gas jockeys had said, "You're on the radio," but we didn't expect a reception as big as this. As we shut down the engine, microphones on booms came orbiting out through the open windows, and photographers were fighting for position up by the prop. There were a few newspaper reporters there, but these were mostly TV people, scrappy and full of elbows. They all shouted into the cockpit at once, "How do you feel, boys? How do you feel?" After the interviews, the TV reporters wanted to do a voiceover shot of Kern and me looking at our map, laid flat over the tail of the Cub. While the cameras were rolling, one of the reporters yelled out, "Boys, where are you headed next?" We looked on the map, which happened to be the Phoenix sectional. It was obvious that we'd have to make a fuel stop at a place called Tucson, Arizona. But neither of us had ever heard of Tucson before. Kern stabbed Tucson on the map with his finger and stared straight into the cameras. "Tucson," he said. "That's where we're headed next, Tucson, Arizona." Haw! The reporters couldn't believe it, and everybody started to howl with laughter and furiously scribble in their notepads. Here were these two kids from New Jersey pedaling across America in their penny loafers in a Piper Cub without a radio, and the dumb little shits didn't even know how to pronounce. Tucson. But Kern was on a roll now, and he wasn't stopping. Another reporter yelled out, "And what's after that? What's your route of flight next?" We checked the map again, and it looked like this small city right along the border with Mexico, Yuma, was another logical stop. From there, it was just a hop, skip, and a jump across the Salton Sea into Southern California. Kern smiled again into the camera. "Yuma," he said. "After Tucson, we'll land at Yuma." Haw, the reporters laughed their asses off, and they had their angle now. The Beverly Hillbillies fly coast to coast. They all howled again when we did the brakes, throttle, contact routine and taxied the plane over to the tie-downs. I could see them shaking their heads as we taxied off. Jesus, these tykes actually made it over the Rockies in that crate. So there's some really nice scenes that after we got to Yuma in the motel room that night, you know, I'd called home and we told my father we bought this water bag. He was obsessed that we had this water bag tied between our landing gear, you know, in case we had to crash land in the desert and the water bag would keep us alive, you know. And all the way across the country, I talked to him at night. "Oh yeah, Dad, I got that water bag. This really great guy with a big steerman, you know, he showed us how to tie it to the landing gear and everything." And this was 1966. The water bag was like 46, like, you know, Grapes of Wrath era. And there were no water bags. So all the way across, I just lied to my father about it. And Kern, you know, we sat up in the hotel room. "You know, the thing about you, Ricker, that I really admired, you know, there was a big thunderstorm that night, and make a beautiful movie scene, you know. You know the thing about you that I really admire?" I go, "What?" "You don't have any problem lying to Dad. I mean, just bald-faced lies. There's no water bag, you know." No. So the next morning, so we had a nice brotherly conversation that night. Next morning, We got into the Yuma airport. We were excited about it because we had a 3-hour hop. It was actually the longest hop of the trip. But then we would land at Brown Field in San Diego, and we would be there. In the morning at the Yuma airport, we were delighted to see that we didn't have to wash the plane. The thunderstorm had scrubbed 71 Hotel clean. We waited for the reporter out on the bench at the gas pumps, enjoying the open views out to the desert. It was a beautiful Friday morning, and several pilots had showed up early to get a head start on their weekend flying. The airport manager and a couple of geezers came out and sat with us on the bench. Yuma was a friendly strip, and everybody wanted to hear about our coast-to-coast flight. One of the geezers had made tea. He was pouring out a cup for everyone from a large thermos when the detail from the United States Border Patrol showed up. 3 green and white pickups with flashing cherry lights pulled in through the airport gates, drove across the ramp, and took positions around our Cub. Kern and I ran over to the plane. I could see right away that this was a serious group of lawmen, or at least they considered themselves serious lawmen. But mentally, they looked pretty far down the evolutionary chain. Their uniforms bristled with insignia and badges, and their belts were heavy with guns, walkie-talkies, and mace. On top of sullen, porcine faces, the border patrolmen wore these ridiculous-looking shellacked straw hats, too small for their heads. Instead of the shellac, the officer in charge wore a gray felt Stetson. "Morning, boys," said the gray hat. "We're here to inspect this plane. There was an illegal crossing from Mexico last night by air, and we believe this to be the aircraft. Everything's got to be stripped. Floorboards, seats, engine covers, all the inspection plates." My brother protested, explaining that we had landed yesterday afternoon before 3 o'clock. We could prove it. There were plenty of witnesses who saw us land, and we even had a fuel receipt. The gray hat snapped back. "I don't give a rat's ass when you say you landed. This is a standard airport check, routine." "Routine?" Kern asked. "Yeah, routine. Where are you boys from?" "New Jersey." "Well, good. You're a long way from home, I guess. This is the way we do things out here." I didn't like this dipshit gray hat one bit, which was a dangerous mood for me to get into. I was the kind of kid that cops took one look at and decided to pick on because I displayed such a rotten attitude. They were always nabbing me for blowing up mailboxes or mooning old ladies. And once this local primate in uniform actually issued me a summons for passing a stopped school bus on my bicycle. But I didn't mind because I was used to it. They could pick on me all they wanted. But now my brother looked upset, which infuriated me. This was one thing, actually, that I had swallowed right up to the pole from my father: his healthy loathing for cops. He had a good bickering manner to him around the law, denuding officers of authority by peppering them with a lot of difficult questions, taunting them with heavy verbal dosages of "my ass." And I was sick of the perils of this trip. There was always more peril: thunderstorms, malevolent morons, rattler snake, pocket protector FAA man. I'd had enough of that shit. I wasn't in the mood for this ersatz white herb in the gray hat. "Routine my ass," I said to the gray hat. "We're not from Mexico. My brother just told you, we're from New Jersey." The gray hat bristled and clutched both hands on his belt. "Son, I don't know who the hell you think you are. I'm an officer of the law, a federal officer of the law. I have a right to inspect this plane and any other plane on this airport. Now, I've given you a lawful order to strip this aircraft. Are you going to obey?" No, I wasn't. They weren't getting anywhere near 71 Hotel without a fight. My father's lawyer had told me once that the best way around a cop was to throw out a lot of legal mumbo-jumbo. Demands for warrant, probable cause, any other phrase from the Constitution that you could remember. This stalled a lot of cops because they could never remember whether the instructor back at the police academy told them they had to have a warrant for this situation, or shit, maybe the guy said we didn't. What the hell, give it a throw. My ass, I said to the gray hat, where's your warrant? Now listen here, son, do you want me to call for help? Oh, help my ass, where's your warrant? It bothered me a lot that my voice cracked every time I screamed my ass. I should have been able to deliver that in a calm, masculine tone, the way Clint Eastwood and Steve McQueen did it in the movies. But it was working. The spectacle of the coast-to-coast kids getting busted by the Border Patrol was too much for the Yuma Flyers. The whole airport exploded with rage. While I screamed into one ear of the gray hat, the airport manager came over and screamed into the other. The geezer ambled over with his thermos of tea and called the gray hat a flaming jackass. Apparently the Border Patrol was not liked in Arizona. While the illegals streamed across the line down there, the Border Patrol was always up here, harassing the naturalized population. The border lawmen were especially detested at airports where they were famous for pulling ramp checks on the wrong planes. It got to be madness out there. Everybody was screaming at the gray hat, who by now could see that he had another Dodge City on his hands. Because it seemed to be working and it felt so good, I kept yelling, my ass, even when nobody was listening. Listen here, the gray hat screamed, pointing his finger at my nose. You stop saying my ass to me or I will have your ass. Oh, my ass, I said. Hey, officer, my ass too, the geezer screamed at the gray hat. Nobody's violating the law saying my ass. My ass, golly, I like that, said the airport manager. My ass, you boys from New Jersey are all right. Officer, what are you going to do? Call headquarters and tell them this boy's upsetting you, saying my ass? When the reporter from the newspaper arrived, he jumped in too. He shoved a pile of clips about us in front of the gray hat, and he was real shrewd about what he said too. Hey fella, go ahead and bust these kids. The whole country is following their trip. Now the Border Patrol wants to strip their plane. It's a great story for me. The Border Patrol crumbled. While the shellac hats stepped back into their pickups and lit cigarettes, the gray hat attempted to save face, asking to see Kern's license. Yep, T. Kernahan Buck out of New Jersey. Tons of witnesses here said you landed yesterday afternoon at 3. Guess we'll be leaving then. And I always love it when they do this. I love it when they do this. Have a safe trip. It's a delight when you're writing a book and you get to near the end of a chapter and you realize, wow, I have a natural transition to something that's really exciting and really important for the book. And the best scenes in a book are ones that it seems to the reader you kind of buried it, but then they come upon right after the my ass scene. They come upon this. And so we flew west over the Colorado River and into California past endless undulating formations of sand dunes as fresh and as clean as beaches. Then the lush, irrigated lands of the Imperial Valley opened green for us, and El Centro and the Superstition Mountains went by. That leg was one of the longest of the trip, a little over 3 hours, and it was 3 hours of peaceful, carefree flying when we owned the sky and everything in it. Kern and I were silent in the cockpit, barely exchanging a word. It was a beautiful morning with pristine desert scenery floating by under the wings, and we were almost there. We didn't want the trip to end, and it seemed too sacred a moment to spoil with talk. Over the last range of mountains before San Diego, we got caught on top of the clouds. The Pacific Ocean had poured its morning surplus of fog onto the brown hills, and the moisture couldn't get past the high pressure on the eastern side. But there would be a break in the clouds for us, there always was. We held our compass course for 10 minutes until it appeared, a hole just big enough for our wings. Spiraling down, we saw California all at once. We came out over suburban red tile roofs and water sprinklers making miniature rainbows over meticulously kept green lawns. Every square foot of Southern California seemed occupied by man, but it was a bright, ordered, and prosperous occupation. Just ahead of us lay Brown Field, and we flew over and entered the traffic pattern. Screech, screech, 2 tires down in California. Through heat mirages shimmering off the tarmac, we could see another horde of reporters waiting for us by the operations building, jumping the gun on the Los Angeles media. But I couldn't have cared less about those reporters just then. It had been 6 days of hard flying in hell, and our waists and our stick hands were as sore as roadkill. We were tired, we were burnt to a crisp, and our ears were ringing from the constant din of the Continental engine. But we were there. A sea breeze was blowing, and I could smell salt air from the Pacific Ocean. My brother was at rest. He was quiet and contemplative up front, a monk in his cell. He wiggled the rudders for me to taxi in. Resting a stick hand on the crash struts, he reached back with the other hand and squeezed my knee. Rink, we have done this thing. We made it, coast to coast. So I'm going to stop there now and hope that I haven't run over, because people might want to ask questions, and we can devote some time to questions if...
Took a bookmark in the place where you were real close to a Greyhound bus or something?
Yeah, there's, well, yeah, I could reach the Greyhound bus, but, it was just, it was a long day. I mean, do it yourself, drive it. You don't have to fly it. Highway 10 from El Paso to, Hobbs, New Mexico, all the way to Thermal, Arizona. I mean, just all the way to Yuma, Because it was desert all around there, and it was the only safe thing was to fly the highway. So, and the night before I'd gone out with this guy, Robert Payton, in El Paso, He was like, hey, 15 years old, flew this plane all the way out here. It's not too young to learn what a martini is, So I had a few of those. And I was sleeping in the back seat, and then you come all the way around this mesa, just Highway 10 all day, big long yellow line. And the only thing you can see ahead of you is a Greyhound bus. And you just get lower and lower and lower out of curiosity. And then what annoyed us, what pissed us off, was the bus driver, the Greyhound bus driver, starts flashing his lights. Like, hey, give me the right of way on this highway, And I just thought this thing, I said it to my brother, and it was like he was in the movie The Shining or something. He just transformed into the first really evil, malevolent moment of his life. I just said, hey, Kern, chicken? Now we just headed for that place. And he ran off the road. I sent a manuscript to a guy named Jack McNamara, who's a very highly respected aviation attorney. As a matter of fact, he was many years president of the American Aviation Lawyers Association. I sent it. I said, hey, Jack, you better read this thing. There might be some illegal stuff in here that we ran a bus off the road. Do I have to change that? It's what happened. And he calls me back up on the phone a few days later. He goes, well, there's an awful lot of illegal shit in this book. A lot. I haven't told my publisher that any of this stuff is. He goes, but you're in luck. The only reason you're in luck is that the statute, I looked them all up, and the statute of limitations on these violations has passed. So, yeah, the avocados too,
let's see what happens. Any other questions? People are yawning. That's embarrassing. Please.
From a flying standpoint,
Sure.
did you ever find yourselves temporarily disoriented? Not using the word lost, just
Oh, that's what you said? Yeah. Well, one of the things I'm proudest of, because I really was a pretty crack navigator, and I really worked hard at it, was if you look at the map, pretty much the most direct route, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to El Paso. It's about 1,600 miles, and there's no major cities, not a single major city. And we navigated point to point all the way across, just pilot engine dead reckoning, and we were never really lost. But the couple times we did get lost was on the way home. We decided to go to New Orleans, Galveston and New Orleans, go that way. And there's a huge lake by St. Charles, Louisiana. And it was a thunderstorm. I don't know. Seems like we could get across this, you know. And then the rain really caught us. I was kind of frightened, and it was just black, raining hard. It was raining hard enough that the rain was coming through the seal on the windshield and getting us wet. And then we came out on the other side, and we were so far off our course by that point that we weren't even on the map anymore. You know? And the other thing that happened was we got to Pensacola, Florida, and we were flying home. And we met this old geezer there. You know, these airport guys are great. He goes, well, you guys can throw away the maps now. And I go, well, why would we do that? He goes, well, 8 miles north of here is a pipeline, and it goes straight to New York City. Yeah. Just get on that thing and keep on going. So we got on the thing, we were flying along, and we didn't have those maps anyway, because we hadn't bought maps for that route. And, you know, I'm following along on the one remaining map we had, and we got somewhere up in North Carolina or something. Well, there's nothing here that I recognize, and there's no map to recognize it with, you know. So we just kept following the pipeline, and then there was an airport, you know. Just like, you know, just landed, filled up with gas. And we did that all afternoon, and then we got up to Shenandoah Valley and into Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and we knew where we were then, you know. So yeah, we got lost that way. Yeah. So, temporary disoriented. Thank you.
Now, when you say maps, you're using aircraft charts or road maps?
We use so-called airman's charts, sectional charts published by the Federal Aviation Administration, which were much more detailed in those days. But the big thing was, getting out there and realizing, you know, every town in the Midwest has a big water town. Xenia or Kingsville, you know. And my brother said, you know, I don't like the way that weather looks. You know, do you know exactly where we are? And I go, oh yeah. And you look down and it's just right over Athens, Ohio. You know. So we used those charts, but the big discovery of the trip was that you could follow roads and follow rivers, and most of the time, like we follow the Wabash River Valley down to the Mississippi. Most of the time, it gets you there, you know, just as quick as a compass or a VOR course or something. The funny thing about that was after the book came out, the New York Times came up to write an article about the book and me and everything, and I took him around for an airplane ride and everything. And the reporter didn't know anything about aviation, so he goes in there. And the geezer at the Great Barrington Airport where I was flying was a guy named Walt Kolosna. And he was a designated flight examiner for the area, and this old airport guy, and the reporter goes in and goes, Mr. Kolosna, you know, isn't it amazing what these guys did when they were 16 years old? I mean, you know, they flew all the way across the country, and they followed the railroad lines, and they got there. And Walt looks at that guy, and goes, no. Walt goes, I mean, the railroad lines don't move. So, anyone else? Please, yes.
where's your airplane now?
It's really interesting. You can go online, and there's a guy named Chris Nesson who lives in Chattanooga, and he bought the plane pretty much from the guy we sold it to years and years and years ago. Because once we went away to college, we didn't really have much need for that Cub anymore, and it wasn't until I sat down to write the book that I realized that there was anything significant about our flight at all. So he bought it, and it had been sitting in a hangar for a while, and maybe got some moisture on it and stuff, and he did a mid-condition rebuild and flew it to Oshkosh this summer, where he got a lot of attention for being in the original Flight of Passage plane. And he flew into Connecticut and took my brother and I for rides, and it was really fun. But I mean, he did a beautiful recovery job. He replaced all the parts he had to. There was some tubular steel on the airframe that needed to be rewelded and stuff like that. But if you go online, I forget what they call it, but I think if you just put in, Flight of Passage Piper, his website will come up. And what was interesting, so then, he flew out there with his wife, and she got to California, and people were like, "Wow, what's the trip rough?" Oh, no, it's not that rough. I don't know where it was. It's a big deal. And then they got out to California after crossing the desert, which was really fun. His wife said, "Forget it, I'm flying home commercial." I had enough. So, anybody else? Please, in the back, yeah.
Yeah, I remember something about a hangar in a hot place maybe in Texas.
Oh, the old rattlesnake.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that was Wink, Texas. And we went in there because it was the correct route for us to get to the Guadalupe Pass and fly over the Rockies. And, but it was a very remote area at West Texas. And there was just this kind of roughneck guy at that airport, with holes in his boots and everything. And he was kind of a boasty guy. And he said, and Kern, whenever he got out of an airplane, his whole thing was he would walk and look inside every hangar. Because especially out there, you'd see an old Corsair or some Twin Beach or something. It's always interesting what was in the hangars. And so Kern starts walking towards the hangar, and the guy's up on the wing, putting the gas in. He goes, "Just throw the door wide open. There's all kinds of really good stuff in there to look at." So Kern opens that door, and the roar that came out of that place. And what it was rattlesnakes. Thousands of rattlesnakes in cages. And what they did was, on the hot nights, the snake will always go towards heat. So the rattlesnakes would go on the runway in the middle of the night, and they would go down the runway with these long poles with a little pull thing that they'd catch them with. And there's a big export market for rattlesnake meat. The Japanese love it. The Asians love snake meat. So they would keep these things in the hangar while they were waiting to send them off to the slaughterhouse or whatever. And I mean, Kern got halfway in that hangar, and wow! And the rattlesnakes are all on the edge of the cages, and he just came running across that apron. Oh, Jesus! So yeah, rattlesnakes. And those are the kind of incidents that make a book, because people think, "Oh, this guy's going to tell a story about how they work the rudder pedals and no, it was a sense of discovery. It was a surprise. It's the problems we had, the idiot people we ran into, or just getting a sense of we get out west and crossing these long highways in Texas, and that Cub had a published airspeed of 85 miles an hour, but the westerlies, you always had about 20 knots on your nose over the high plains of Texas. And so we're going along the highway, maybe 65, 60, and I'd be looking back on the highway, and this big old Cadillac is coming along. And in those days, every kid, you could tell whatever car was on the road just by looking at the grill. That's what kids do. And boy, this guy's getting closer, and then also just passes right underneath us. I mean, the cars were passing us on the highways. Sometimes and that's why we ran the bus off the road. I'm convinced of that. I'm so sick of cars passing. I'm in an airplane, and people are writing newspaper articles about me. And some guy is down there in a Studebaker Lark, passing me. And then, so a bus comes along, and you just take your road rage out on the Greyhound bus. So, are we good? Oh, please.
Are you still flying now?
I'm not current right now. I fly with friends quite a bit. You might have heard that I took a covered wagon trip across the Oregon Trail, and that kept me really busy for the summer, and then getting the book done and so forth. My flying tapered off when my kids were in college, and I needed to spend my money there. But I'm actually dreaming about flying a lot more again, so we'll see. Please go back, yes.
So what's the new book?
The new book is called The Oregon Trail, An American Journey, and it'll be out, it looks like June now. And it's a long story. I became fascinated by the Oregon Trail and read in one of the histories that there were a lot of things about the trail that people don't really realize today, and it would make an interesting book. And then I read that the trail had not been crossed authentically in a covered wagon with mules in 109 years. And I said, well, that's a nice book. So my brother, anybody in the audience know Nick Buck? Yep. I survived 4 months on a 38-inch wide wagon seat with Nick Buck. So Nick and I took the trip. Maybe some of you read his lectures about the Oregon Trail, but that'll be out in June. It'll be nice. Excuse me? That's what he said? That is a libel, yeah. No, Nick was, first of all, trying to get across somebody's land quietly, because you don't really have permission to be there. And Nick said, well, what I think about this subject is, and it's like he had a foghorn attached to the wagon. No, he was great though. He really knows his animals, and he really knows his mechanics. It was a wonderful trip. So that book will be out early summer. Another adventure. Well, thank you very much. This is really fun, and he's got one more question.
I got one more question.
Sure.
Because, it just interests me, maybe others, is that was a pretty big experience for a couple of guys.
Mhm.
Can you make any changes or perspectives in your life that it may?
You mean the Oregon Trail trip?
No, the flight of passage. I mean,
Well, there was one thing. There were a couple things. I was a very bookish kid, and what happened was the family was very chaotic, and my father was involved in all kinds of causes and everything, because we just had so many kids, and my dad was involved in all kinds of causes, and there was sort of an adolescent turning away from me. I would hide out in the barn or way up in the attic and read a lot, because it was my escape. And there was a lot of reading that I did that really helped me. It wasn't something I read specifically for the trip, but I knew about Wiley Post and Charles Lindbergh. Charles Lindbergh's first flight, the main flight that he really tested out the spirit of St. Louis. He flew from San Diego to St. Louis on an overnight hop, and he deliberately flew south over the Guadalupe Mountains to make sure that he could clear it at night. And he had engine trouble that night, and he turned even further south. So I knew about that. I knew Wiley Post going through there, I knew about the airmail pods. And so what changed me was, I always felt like I would have been a nerd boy, kind of, Microsoft, they're reading the book again, and it's kind of a weirdo, And I realized from that trip that all the reading actually took me somewhere. It was an affirmation. The other thing that changed me a lot, I think, was that I had no appreciation that I was a good navigator, and I learned on that trip that I was. So there were things about myself that I had that I didn't realize were valuable. So that was great. I'd love to sign books for people if you want to do it. So thank you. It's really been fun being here tonight.